think I would be a successful filmmaker. I didn't actually necessarily think I was like particularly more gifted than some of the people I was hanging out with. But I think maybe what worked in my favor is like the fact that I didn't go through a lot of conventional routes. I was like, oh, I feel like I know how to chart a course from A to B. It might take a little longer, but I feel like I can do that. And half of that was just like backing myself, being like, okay, you know, some of my friends make music. Nobody's gonna give them money to make a video. I'll pay for the video. That's my strategy. You know, I could be using this money for pay my rent, but I'm gonna just like use it as a calling card. And if it works out, then maybe I'll get to make more videos. So that was literally kind of my strategy in being like, work with friends. So most of them, so long as they didn't have to pay out of pocket, you know. And then quite luckily, because I'd done like a long period of like an apprenticeship effectively, I'd probably done about 6 years of apprenticeship, knowing what to avoid and how not to like waste money, because it's very easy to waste money. I think that kind of made me feel a little bit more secure in my choices. So ultimately, having like a safeguard for choices, taking a few risks with people who did it well, it was always like, if I have to depend on other people giving me money, I might not be able to make the thing I want to make, or I'm going to have a lot of, you know, I'm going to have a lot of feedback. And at that early point in my career, like I was not interested in feedback. Now I'm a lot more like indifferent to feedback, but definitely then I was just, I couldn't deal with I couldn't deal with feedback. So yeah, I think that was probably my strategy. It still is really. It's just, you know, try things, be quite brave. You know, I was talking to someone earlier about like the process. I'm more interested in the process than the execution, because I think actually that creates a space to experiment and mess things up and just make a bit of a mess. Because I think if you're so focused on the execution, maybe you miss certain things that could make the final outcome richer than you may have like anticipated. But yeah, I love strategy.
So what was the strategy for this?
Funnily enough, I basically I go through, I basically learned, I didn't come to a nice school like this. I basically went to the school of YouTube and would go on these deep dives and just like look at topics that I was really interested in. And this one was quite interesting. I stumbled across like the first Miss Black America pageant, I think it was. I'll give you a short story about that. It was done in like, I think it was done in like Jersey City or Atlantic City or something like that. And they tried to do it in the hall where they did Miss America, but they weren't allowed because they were black. So they actually did the first Miss Black America pageant across the street. And the guy who did the pageant was like, he just wanted to do an event so that his daughters could see black women as being super beautiful. And that kind of stuck with me. So I kind of wrote this idea of like doing a community celebration, a community pageant. The initial plan was to do it with my friends in London, shoot in London. But luckily, another part of my process is like travel, which I've just sort of like recently like rediscovered again. And I met the image directors at Kenzo, and they'd seen my first film. And I remember like we met and they spoke about my first film, but I was really shy and I didn't know what to say. And then I didn't give them my number or email, and then they like disappeared. I was like, shit, I really should have, you know. And then I saw them 2 weeks later, and the first thing I said was like, hi, can I get your email? And then they said they had a project to do which required some stills and a video. There was like a budget, and they said, do you want to pitch on this? So I came up with that first. I looked through my dossier of ideas, and then this one was there. It had to be like in celebration. I was like, okay, cool, I got something for this. And at the time, I kind of stalked technicians. I stalked photographers. I stalked production designers, cinematographers, makeup people. Like, if they're any good, like, I kind of just like follow them and harass them, and like, not harass. I just send them nice messages or whatever about how much I like their work. And at the time, a friend of mine had sent me a photographer called Ruth Asai. And Ruth was, I think she'd gone to photography school or art school or something, or St. Martin's maybe. And she wasn't actually shooting fashion. She was doing more, she was working for like an NGO, and part-time in the NGO, she would go into communities across sub-Saharan Africa, and she would set up these photo booths just with a backdrop and just shoot local people so they could have a picture of themselves. And she was putting that stuff on Instagram, and I was like, this is amazing. Like, this is some of the best stuff I'd seen. It was really sort of, you know, in her own aesthetic. And I kind of was like, well, I'm not a photographer. I don't consider myself a photographer, so I'd like to work with someone like her. And then we spoke. She was very skeptical. She thought I was a crazy person from the internet, which is fair enough. But I kind of convinced her to do it. I sort of said, don't worry, we're not going to get fashion people telling us what to do. We're just going to do what we want to do. And I think she kind of flipped it and tested me and basically said, all right, let's shoot in my village in Nigeria. Because initially I wanted to shoot in London. And I was like, okay, sure. And then told the Kenzo guys, and they thought it was like the best idea ever. So we fashioned this around her local village where she grew up with her grandparents. Our base was her grandparents' house, and the festival evolved to celebrating what the community. So they have like a harvesting festival. So the film was part community pageant, part festival, all sort of thrown into one. And yeah, we just created a whole bunch of images. We managed to lure Ib Kamara into this, and he kind of styled the whole thing. And that's kind of, that's the story of that.
So should we watch the film now?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, let's do that.
So with this, I thought it would be interesting to talk a bit about narrative storytelling in the context of fashion film, which I think is a very different thing to, let's say, kind of longer form films. How does that, or like, how do you approach that, and how do you communicate that in a way that it exists both, let's say, as a kind of commercial thing and an artistic thing?
I'm not entirely sure. I think I've been fortunate enough to work with like brands like Kenzo or Carhartt or I don't know that like extend a lot of trust, because I generally find if I feel like the brand trusts me, then I sort of go above and beyond, because I think for me, like, I love storytelling. It's pretty much what I've been interested from the get-go, and I think maybe now there's more so, but at least when I won't pretend like I knew a lot about fashion either, but I always thought there was a big opportunity. You have clothes, you have some of the finest technicians doing hair, makeup, light, like, it feels like the perfect platform to tell stories, even if they're shorter form. So I think for me, it kind of, that becomes the premise of the idea. It's like, how do you, and I think also maybe when I was starting out, and same now, I'm still obsessed with the sustainability of an idea. Like, how long can that far out serve its purpose? Someone was asking me a few days ago, I've got like nothing on my Instagram or whatever, and someone was asking me about a video I made that I'd interviewed loads of people, because a lot of my work is sort of now, more so than then, is more research-based, a lot of interviews and stuff. But there's just something that I feel I don't have a lot out there, because I'm maybe like protesting a little bit, because I feel like everything's too accessible and not valued enough. So that's some inner dialogue I'm trying to figure out. But I think when it comes to fashion, I just think you have the perfect sort of playground, actually. I enjoy fashion videos, but a lot of the time I think they're too earnest. It's just like, models are fun, they like to have fun, so you've put them in a context where they are having fun, and don't sort of make them like model and pose. I tend to think that's better. But again, it sort of depends who I'm working with, With Kenzo, I was really fortunate. I guess the premise was it needs to be a celebration. And I think I'm Nigerian, and I was like, hold my beer, we do celebrations very easily. But in this context, it was, for example, I don't know how long this video is, maybe like 9 minutes or something, maybe 6 or something. But my videos are a bit longer, because in general, I want to celebrate what's on there. I want to like put an importance of value on there. At the time, I wasn't seeing a lot of, like black faces, maybe in fashion in this sort of celebratory way. So I was like even more conscious of the videos being as long as they are. And then when it comes to, then you break it down in Nigeria, like I'm from Lagos. Lagos has a lot of monopoly on what it means to be Nigerian. So Ruth saying we should shoot in the east of Nigeria, where no one really knows anything about, externally or to a point, was another reason why we sort of chose to do this. And I think that kind of stems from that London idea of like reflecting, like creating a platform for like those near you and those around you who might not otherwise have it, basically. But yeah, coming back to your question, I think like commercially it's a lot harder to do. I think when you work with sort of bigger brands, everything is kind of like managed to a point. They have creative directors who generally come up with the sort of idea, and as a director, you're just coming in there to sort of like put a spin on it. But in cases where I do get to be the creative director on this, for example, it was kind of, it's kind of easy. I mean, I think like if I'm interested in a topic, I'll sort of pursue it with as much sort of like love and almost careless abandon as possible. And coming back to travel, this gave me an opportunity to travel, to learn a lot about this community, to actually cast from the community, like, laughing watching this video because it was total chaos. We had like a guy who was helping us riding around on the scooter, and I was like, yeah, just get him to ride around in the shot and stuff like that. And a lot of these kids, like, English wasn't necessarily their first language, so trying to explain to them, yeah, we want to make a fashion film where you're all going to hold hands and dance and sing, you know. Like, again, that process is something that, you know, to me, I feel like that process was worth more than the video. But again, the video kind of turned out as it is because, again, Kenzo didn't even come to the shoot because they thought Nigeria is like this totally unsafe place. So when they saw the video, they were like a bit kind of speechless. They were just like, okay, we were probably expecting like a 2-minute video. And then off the back of that, they started they did a zine, which they'd been wanting to do for ages to keep in that sort of celebratory fashion. They did launches in America and wherever. But I think that's just sort of speaks to the testament of like everyone who sort of came to collaborate feeling sort of free and valued and enjoyed what they were doing and knew like the story we were in service of in a way. But yeah.
So say in other cases with other brands, when that negotiation has to happen, how do you navigate, let's say, resistance, right, from a creative director or from whoever's in charge? Because, as you say, this was very free and very open, but in the cases when it's not, because that happens too, how do you approach that? What do you do?
Maybe there's like 2 schools of thought.
Yeah.
One is quite pragmatic and it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to try and give you my opinion. If you're not interested in my opinion, like you're not paying me for my opinion, you're just paying me to deliver. So in that sense, it's just I'm servicing a job. In another I think is just like comes with territory of being a director. And I guess maybe it works in my trajectory because of a lot of what I've done in assisting, like, even though I thought maybe at some point I wanted to be a director, there's a lot of humility involved. So you actually, like, it's just being able to listen a lot and actually trying to ascertain what people are after. And then I think the most valuable thing as a director is sort of people skills, being able to manage people. I think that gets you very far in life. And I think if people feel like you have their best intentions, they might soften in many instances. But I don't know. I think every case is totally different. I think that it's about sort of, I think after a while you kind of understand what people are saying and what they really want. If you put loads of good ideas forward and they keep getting ignored, you're like, yeah, okay, they're not interested in that. They just want to do what they want to do. And in that instance, you kind of just have to get on board and make the best thing possible because they're paying you in many instances. But again, it totally varies, and I think you can find creative ways of making it happen. You know, I think if someone has an overall vision, as a director, you know, I still get to work tactilely with a cinematographer, or I still get to like try and be maybe somewhat subversive and telling the makeup person, do you want to try this or do that? And again, a lot of devil's in the detail. Like if people aren't sort of detail centric, then they might miss a lot of things. But I am quite sort of obsessed with detail. So there's always ways of like trying to sort of impart stuff if you can't do it overtly. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, because you're talking a lot about process, and even now when you're talking about details and how you can intervene on set, I also feel like, and having experienced it, I feel like a lot of the work that you do, as much as it translates into the output, it also happens on set. Like this idea of community is not just kind of the thing that's part of the film, right? It happens way before. It happens from the beginning. So could you talk a bit about this in relation to community, right? Like you're talking about how you casted people and how it was actually part of a local event.
Sure. I think sort of, yeah, I think like in order to sort of get something that feels authentic, I think you just want to go to the source. I think a lot of people make the mistake of trying to recreate what the source would be doing. So for this, for example, like, you know, we could have brought models from Lagos, but we're like, we might as well work with people. I like a certain sense of awkwardness because I feel like it sort of it reads truer on camera. And then again, when I sort of work with collaborators, I approach people for what they do, and I don't tell them to like move in a different direction. It's like, I like what you do, come and do that with me. I'll give you like an overall vision, but just like feel free. My biggest thing on set is like, let's try it. If it doesn't work, we do something else basically. But I want people to feel free in order to try stuff. Otherwise, I don't think you don't get like sort of magic moments. But coming to like the idea of sort of community, I guess it's sort of broader, but this one was very specific, and again, it's because like the interest that I'm sort of obsessed with. Ruth's work I was obsessed with, so just being around her was great. Ib Kamara, it was just starting out, and I still think what he does is incredible. Going into this community, like where we shot, this place called Nsukka was like the first indigenous university in Nigeria. It's it's where Chimamanda Adichie Adeze comes from. So like just being there in a sense felt like an honor, effectively. And I think when you go into those spaces, there's a certain authenticity because actually you're kind of a geek about the space. So when you speak to people, you're just like super encouraging. And I think, and I think it's just about trust, really. I think, some days you're gonna have to like carry people, but if people trust you, then if you're having a bad day, they'll carry you back as well. And I think that comes from an obsession with like what everyone does. I was talking about Instagram before and like stalking technicians, but that's how I found you guys effectively. It was through an introduction, and then I looked at what you guys did, and I was like, okay, I genuinely like a lot of that, and we still send each other videos on YouTube of like what we'd like to do to each other, and that's kind of the approach in general with people I admire, because I think like starting out, like loads of people who are successful now, we all started together, and maybe at the time when you're starting out with someone, you think going for someone at a higher echelon will serve you better, but actually I think if people are on the same trajectory as you and you build that community, they want to make their best thing, So actually you're all kind of growing together, and at that point, not this video, but the first video I did, some production designer friends of mine, they'd done a lot of stills, but they'd never done moving image. And after that was the first moving image video they did, and we still work together till today. So I think it's just about encouraging people, giving them their flowers when they're around, letting them know you like believe in them and trust in them, even if they don't necessarily see it for themselves in some situations.
So maybe we should move on to Parts of Me, which was the first thing that we did together. And maybe you could give us a bit of background, but it's a nice leeway into this question of directing, because I clearly remember at the end of the day, I went up to you and I was like, oh, thanks for everything. And then you said, I didn't do much. And I found that so interesting, because even being on set, it was like, as you say, everyone had their space, and I think we felt really trusted. But it would be nice, kind of as an introduction, to give us a bit more details around how that relationship started on your end, right, with Priya and Mulberry and the whole kind of backstory.
Sure. So I think a part of my trajectory is like I try and support young black fashion designers. I started with Bianca Saunders. I work with Nicholas Daly. I've worked with Priya Lawalia. You name it, I'm in their DMs basically, just being like, we should shoot something together. Maximilian Davis, for example. With Priya, I think it was the same thing. I think I'd been shortlisted to work with her in a different film the year before, and it didn't work out. But the film came out and it was shot by another friend of mine, Sam Olanapeku, and it was great. And I told her just as much. I was like, shame we didn't make it, but the film was great anyways, And then, Priya hit me up. I think a year later, she had a collaboration with Mulberry. She's Nigerian and Indian, so it's like where both cultures sort of collide. And she wanted to just pay homage. Again, her work is a lot about celebration. but yeah, I think it was in service to these bags that she'd collaborated with Mulberry, and she was working with Studio Augmenta, the people I just referenced that we did the first video, one of my first videos together. And I was like, oh, cool, you're already working with half my team. So, but at that point, I'd been speaking to you guys, Cream Studios, about trying to, I think maybe 6 months before, about doing a music video with like LED screens on like, been obsessed with The Mandalorian and how they like made stuff on these big LED screens. So I think I was probably harassing you guys about trying to figure out how to do it. And then this opportunity came around, and I literally on a call, I think I tried to move everyone away from painted backdrops, because I was like, yeah, everyone does painted backdrops. Like, let's really sort of like push the boat and try and do something that feels a lot more interesting aesthetically. Oh, by the way, I know these guys who make scenic, so I've been speaking to them for about 8 months. They'd be great for this. Everyone kind of like looked at me like I was crazy on the call, but created a document. I think we did an introduction. Had to explain to the Mulberry guys like how this screen technology works. It's like, it's literally just an LED screen, you know, like, and you can mount these sensors and da-da-da. It must have sounded like an absolute nutter, but funnily enough, they kind of warmed to it, you know. I think I bluffed it a lot, that I was like, oh, we've done this before, it's fine, like, it's cool, we nailed this, and that kind of sold them on it. And then, yeah, pretty much after that, it's just a case of like allowing people space to work. I was going to say before, when you're talking about community, like if you cast the right people, for example, for a film, music video, narrative project, that's like half the work done. You know, if you cast the right people. If you cast the wrong people based on sort of the wrong intentions, then you're going to have to really like direct the hell out of something. And I'm sort of been lucky enough where it's like, yeah, I want to work smarter, you know? I want to find the people that feel right for it, just in the way they move and the way they talk and all that kind of stuff, and then just kind of build around that. Because I think that's the beauty of filmmaking, you know, like you put everything together and then it sort of, when everything's together, it all kind of like works out. But if you're thinking of it in just this isolatory thing, then it might not. So yeah, that's a very long introduction to this film, but yeah.
Nice. I guess you kind of, because with this I was going to ask you about, you know, again, collaboration versus hyper-specialized roles. And, you know, you already said, you know, you stalk technicians and you put together teams. And I think there's something quite interesting happening right now where there's so many forms of kind of creative collaboration that are encouraged, but at the same time we're seeing like even more like hyper-specialized roles, right? And it feels like that barrier where you can like be whatever you want or like wear multiple hats is somehow getting really, really tight, even though there's this idea of, oh, you know, it can be anything. So I guess in the context of this video, how do you see your role as a director? Do you think of other parts that you occupy, or are you the director?
I was going to come up with a really bad architectural analogy.
Oh, do it.
No. I would say I'm like the captain of a team. Let's just use a sports analogy. Like, effectively, go back to the limitation thing again. It's like, I don't pretend to be like, to know everything. I don't pretend to be like the sort of sage, like who, like, you know. But I think ultimately, like, people who want to try things and create things by definition are quite vulnerable. And I think if you're a calming presence on a vulnerable group of people, I think that kind of like encourages them to do what they need to do. So I think the captain analogy sort of works because sometimes you're going to need to like take things by the scruff of the neck. In general, I say that's more hierarchy facing. That's like protecting people. You know, like everything needs to sort of fall on your shoulders, and you make sure you kind of protect everyone who's like above the line in HOD departments. But I would say that's what I think my role is as a director. I think, but it varies, you know. I think, you know, with fashion again is very, is like even more collaborative, because I think maybe in the last, I mean, they've existed for ages, but maybe in the last 5, 6, 7 years, there's been more movement coaches, right? So when we did Kenza, I'd never even heard of the idea of a movement coach. So now you actually have people working with the models and telling them what to do. In narrative, it's different. You know, you're a bit more hands-on. You know, if you're working with like a child actor or something, you kind of have to remind them of emotionally what they're going through. And also just remember to like not leave them on like an emotional hill. Like remember to kind of, you know, make sure they're sort of okay. That's what I would generally sort of say my role is, because I don't necessarily think, I mean, again, we'll go back to process. I think like it's incredibly hard to make a film. It's even harder to make a good film. But I think what I've learned in the process is if you create a space that people feel trusted, feel they can be vulnerable, feel like they're not going to get shouted out or like talked down at or condescended to or whatever, feel they're going to be protected, and they can bring ideas to the fore and feel a sense of ownership. You know, I'd probably say like 8 out of 10 times you'll get something above what you thought it would be. And I think in addition, if you try and create something that feels sustainable, that again will far outlive its purpose, then I think that also adds to it, basically, you know. But again, just like watching the films, you know, I feel like both of them sort of just a combination of people I like literally geeked over. You know, the first film is a guy called Chino Amobi, who's like an artist now in his own right. But at the time, he ran this record label called Non, but black electronic musicians. So he made that. This one was Kelly Moran, who's signed to Warp, and just been listening to her music over and over again. And I kind of was like, let's just try and see if she'll be up for it. And then even that is a totally different process, because you're dealing with like musicians who are like used to just like getting told, yeah, this is great. And I was like, yeah, Priya doesn't like it. Let's try again, you know? And trying to sort of manage expectations. But I think that's really, in my opinion, that's what a director does. You manage expectations, and then you kind of, you create a space for people to work and kind of, encourage them, basically.
And I guess another thing in the context of part of me is also taking risks, and maybe we can talk about the LED wall situation. Because when we were on calls, there was this kind of thing around, we don't want it to look digital. What if it looks digital? And there was so much resistance towards that. And there was a lot of anxiety on our end as well, because we didn't know how it was going to turn out, and you didn't know how it was going to turn out. And then on set, you were just like, let's try things, like let's take this risk and let's see what happens. So how much, because I think a lot of people think, oh, it's in the storyboards, it's in the mood boards, it's all kind of planned to the minute, right? But in most cases, it comes down to the set and decisions that are taken on the go, or time limitations or whatever. So, yeah, risks. Can you talk a bit about that?
I have like a motto that my business partner hates, where I say like, if it's not scary, I don't think we should do it. But then again, a lot of these risks, like now, it looks like it sort of paid off. But at the same time, it's like what I said. I'd seen you guys work, you know, and I was like, unless they're like totally blagging it, and this is not even their work, you know. But I think you have those calls, you have those pre-production meetings, and like everyone explains what's going on. You apply some pressure on the client, like free us up some more money so we can get good screens. If you don't want it to look digital, then, you know, like pay up, you know, effectively. But yeah, I mean, I think like risk is, for me anyway, risk is important. I know some other people are more adverse to risk, but I go back to saying, when we're talking about strategy, I've always had a relationship with risk. Whether it's like, instead of using my rent money to pay my rent, I use it to make a video. For me, at that point in my career, that was like a massive risk, you know? Telling people that that's what I was doing and then being like, you are actually crazy, you know? To me, that was a big risk. And I still think that's part and parcel of, I don't know if my practice, but how I want to go on, because up until, yeah, you don't know if it's going to be successful up until you try it. And initially, a part I left out from my origin stories, I thought I wanted to be an editor. And I figured out that actually in the edit, if everything's like shit, when you shoot it, you can fix it in the edit. Or you can almost fix it in the edit. So I was just like, I'm pretty confident in the fact that like, if it doesn't work out, you can salvage it in the edit. It won't be as perfect, but you can definitely, you know, I've seen films where like they shot this whole thing and in the edit it's totally different. Obviously, you don't want that to happen more often than not. But I still think that yeah, it's just like about being trusting and again being calm. You know, I think on the day when we were shooting, like one of the panels wasn't working significantly for amount of hours up until shoot time, and we were like, yeah, hopefully it's gonna work, and it did in the end. I've been on sets where like when there's tension, everybody feels the tension and people get shouted at, and I don't think that's I don't think speaking to like professionals in a manner that isn't encouraging in terms of what you're trying to do is productive. So ultimately, I even think in the moments where like things are going terrible, you just have to keep encouraging people, because ultimately, like, you might get a better solution than trying to like squeeze everyone down. I mean, that's some people's approach, and it still works. But for me, like, I don't think it doesn't work for me effectively.
I think we covered the panel with a rock. Do you remember?
We did, yeah. So put something in front of it, yeah. It's a good plan.
And I mean, maybe this is a good thing to ask now, because you talked about, I'm just trying to make this a bit more architecture. I
can give you my analogy if you want to hear my terrible analogy. So what did I say? I said, I guess with architecture you have a client, you know, and then you get, I would say, I would probably be the architect because I come up with a vision for something, right? And then my producer is maybe the surveyor, maybe, I guess, making sure, telling you where the risks might occur, you know, and if this is like a solid idea or a terrible idea. And then you have like a cinematographer who's probably like an engineer or whatever. Then you get the production team who are more like interior. I don't know. Is that good? I see some architects being like, you have no idea what you're talking about. Well, that's why I told you it was a terrible analogy, but I tried it anyways. But yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of it was close, maybe close. Was I close?
Quite close.
No. Shush. Okay, cool.
No, but why I thought about architecture is because of the rock. Because, you know, and you talking about how you wanted to make models and stuff, and you know, spatial things really, because it's all about that, right? Then, you know, when we worked with the LED wall, there was this really interesting moment where suddenly there was a real physical set and then the LED wall, and versus shoots on location, how do you find directing or being in that space of the virtual production set, you know, versus real life location?
I mean, it's totally different. I mean, I think real life you have a lot of you have a lot of limitations based on where you are. You can, you know, you can't move real life around. You kind of have to work with what's there. I think a real set, you're never sure how it's going to come across, and ultimately it's kind of like a sum of everybody's creative ideas like coming to fruition. And plus on set you have the ability to like put a light here or like move a thing here, you know. I think in that situation it's more tactile, and it's kind of like left to your devices how you want to utilize a space. Whereas I think working on location, you kind of have to work with the space a little bit more. And both are totally different depending on what, in terms of experience. I mean, I think that in some instances you can't beat a real location because there's like textures and an essence of a place and history of a place that you can't fabricate. You know, how light hits like walls or panels or whatever, you know. And then I think on set it's different because you know, you can be a lot more sort of pernickety in a way. You can actually so much more control, I'd probably say. Yeah. And
again, like going back to your curiosity towards things and risks, you're also, I think, quite curious about emerging technologies and quite accepting. Like, I feel like in our experience, you're always really kind of like light touch about it. Like it doesn't seem like you are terrified by it or asking too many questions. You just kind of embrace it, right? Do you feel that filmmaking, if it's moving in this kind of virtual production set area, do you see that as an opportunity? Do you see it any different to kind of traditional ways of making films? Do you place it in a lineage? Does it, you know, like, is this a change for you, or do you kind of accept this game engine driven image as a given? You're working with it.
I'd say that kind of speaks again to my level of curiosity. I mean, I play video games a lot, and that I feel like that technology is moving like really fast. So the idea of being able to merge my interest on video games with film, to me, just felt very natural. I embrace technology because I think ultimately, like, there's a way technology is made, and it's kind of how it's, the doctrine of how it is created is told, like, this is how you could use it. But I actually find what's more interesting is like using it in a different way, totally together. I think that's like where formation of ideas come. So I guess with us, I don't necessarily think we've like pushed it as far as we could go, but it was just to try and, on that video, it's just to try and establish that it works. And then I think once you kind of establish that it works, you can start to play with it a little bit more. So I don't necessarily fear it in a way, but then again, like, my intention is just to see if we can't shoot on a beach, for example, in this, or we can't go to India and shoot this, then how do we bring it to us in a way? So in that sense, I sort of like, I'm all for it. Yeah, I mean, I'm just generally interested in it. I think like some things take a lot longer to take stock in general, but for the most part, I think the studios, coming to virtual studios, I think like what like the volume or LED studios presents is incredible, and as much or as close to that sort of technology as I can be. I'd love to, you know. I think like, again, it's working with technicians and people who are really like obsessive about what they do. And I think anybody with that level of passion for what they do and obsessed with it, like, I want to sort of be a part of it. So yeah, I'm kind of into it.
Yeah, because I remember, you know, the cinematographer, Xenia, was it? She was quite, you know, not terrified, but unsure of what was going to happen. And as we were doing it, we found out that there's actually a lot of limitations to it. So again, it goes back to this idea of working within limitations and tight budgets and making it work, which with this kind of tech and this kind of like crazy volume setup is a bit of a problem, right? So, and I think this is maybe a good leeway into the next video.
Yeah, for sure. But I'll just say, I think it's like that thing. I think like if you had limited resources, you could basically do whatever you want. Like I haven't necessarily been fortunate enough to have that across everything I've done. In some instances more than others, but I think then, I don't know, I think in the middle ground is where like ideas like germinate. And I think actually like having those limitations, not having those resources, like everybody's forced to think with their feet and like think quickly and like we don't have time, you know, so let's figure out solutions. And I think like with technology, there's going to be, with like most things, there's going to be a lot of trepidation around it. There's going to be a lot of, I guess, maybe sort of negative press, like it's going to sort of destroy the industry. But I think in many instances, like a lot of things can live side by side. Whether they do or not is a different case in point. I think like in years to come, actually throwing up a green screen might just become very retro once these sort of studios are more available. But yeah, in this next video, this is like a no-budget friend video, you know, because I think there's loads of sort of different scales of stuff. And I think on this video, just to sort of ad-lib and give you some context, it's like a friend of mine, Tyson, been friends with for years. I used to produce a music show, found her music on a blog, asked her to come and sing, and she said no. And then literally about 15 years later, I ended up making like one of her first music videos. The label she signed with is another good friend of mine. All people, we all basically started up together, and it was based on a picture. I think I'd seen a picture of Falcor and the Never-Ending Story, and I was like, yeah, I want to make a video with Falcor. Tyson, would you sit on it? And she basically agreed to it, and then yeah, we ended up making this. But yeah.
Tuesday, are you picking me up? 'Cause I can't get enough of you. Never enough, no it's never enough. 'Cause I can't get enough of you. Today, couldn't end soon enough. 'Cause I can't get enough of you. Never enough, no it's never enough. 'Cause I can't get enough of you. I've been searching, I've been looking for something that I was missing. Was it written in my vision, or was I blind? 'Cause all of the puppies I've been chasing, they don't mean nothing, you replace them. And all of the money we'd be making, it won't mean nothing, they could take it. Tuesday, are you picking me up? 'Cause I can't get enough of you. Never enough, no it's never enough. 'Cause I can't get enough of you. Today, couldn't end soon enough. 'Cause I can't get enough of you. Never enough, no it's never enough. 'Cause I can't get enough of you. Love, love, you know that I've been through it, but you need me to get through it, so I can see it, view it, don't confuse it. But the truth is, just when I felt like giving up, you turned around and lift me up. They had me jumping double dutch. You slow the pace when it's around. Are you picking me up? 'Cause I can't enough of you. Never enough. No, it's never enough. 'Cause I can't enough of you. Today couldn't end soon enough. 'Cause I can't enough of you. Never enough. No, it's never enough. 'Cause I can't enough of your love, your love,
So, how do you make a music video on zero budget? Do explain.
By I don't even know, man. It's a lot of stress, but I think again I found a point of interest. Like I've wanted to work with puppets for a long, long time, and just never, like mentioning puppets to Mulberry, I don't think would have gone down well. So it's like you try and find an outlet to like leverage like your interests, and I think in this situation, I sort of said to her, I was like, this is what we want to do, like, are you down? And she kind of agreed tentatively and was like, is this going to look good? I was like, I have no idea, but, I think I'd sort of been stalking these like puppet makers and kind of I'd spoken to this guy at length of like, okay, so how would this work? And you ended up making something, which is quite funny watching now because sort of her manager and record label people are there in green screen suits flapping the ears in these like creepy suits, but obviously you like grade them out. And then there's someone at the back with some ropes making the eyelids like blink and stuff. So literally, I say all that because it's like a full team effort. Like everybody had to get like on their hands and knees to make it together. And it's with a lot of planning, we had a very, very small budget and got a really good producer, and we just planned like way ahead of time because I think for smaller labels, like you can't, there's no plan B really. Like if anything messes up on the day, then that's the money gone. So you have to be a little bit more meticulous. And I think in that situation, it's just pulling a lot of favors. I think the cinematographer on that, we used to work on reception at an ad company like almost like 15 years before. She was the first person who ever told me what a cinematographer was. And I was like, one day we're going to make a video together. I didn't think she expected to be this, but we ended up sort of working together. And yeah, just like, I think there's a lot of willpower involved, but again, it's just, I think a lot of people will go the distance if they feel they have a voice and they feel they can put their own creative input on things, I think like you'd be surprised. I mean, obviously a lot of people won't, but I think after a while you start to like gravitate to people who have a similar sort of, I guess childlike curiosity that you do, and just like interested in the process, less so than the execution. I think like that process for me was like a total, trial and error, it's like, is the puppet gonna look any good? Is it gonna work? Like, where are we going to keep it? It's in my studio. It's been there for 1.5 years now. But yeah, I think that one's totally different because I feel like when stakes are a little bit lower, like, the rewards might be higher because you don't really have that much in terms of expectation. But yeah, it's still the same thing, still managing expectation and promising everyone it'll be fine, even if you have no idea if it'll be fine. But yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of storytelling, because I want to bring it a bit back to that. You obviously work across narrative film, then fashion film, music videos. How does that work when putting together a music video? At what level does that story exist for you?
Music videos is so different because obviously musicians are creatives in their own right. On many instances, they have their own ideas, and it kind of leans over into that like creative director thing. Like sometimes you're just there to service their idea and bring out the best in their idea. Some instances, like they don't have an idea, and you're like, let's get a 7-foot dog, you know. So it totally sort of varies. But I think music videos, like again, it's like being guided by the music. I have like a strange process. I listen to music. I have like banks and banks of images from different photographers. I don't necessarily have like a hierarchy of where I get images from, whether it's TikTok, whether it's a photography book, whether it's somewhere in the deep dark internet or whatever, preferably not the deep dark internet. But I kind of have folders all like named and dated and stuff. And if ever I'm at a loss for an idea or want to like just mood board stuff, I just listen to music on repeat and go through ideas. And at that point, whether the lyrics are telling you the story, whether the art is telling you the story, like at that point things start like coming into fruition. You know, I like referencing like photographers because I think in another life I maybe would have been a photographer, but I just think, but I'm just more interested in like bringing photographs to life in that sense. So I think I'd seen this one in particular. I'd seen an image of a rapper on Falcor. Someone had obviously like photoshopped a rapper onto Falcor, and I was like, wow, if that was a real video, that would be so great. Because these are like two interests of mine, which is like a childhood story and I guess rap music. And then the idea for Tyson was literally that image. I was like, this is the idea. And she was like, really? I was like, yeah, let's just fly it around London. She literally lives at the bottom of Trellick Tower, so that's kind of why we flew around there. And yeah, when you don't have resources, the narrative can't be like super expansive, so we just kept it really simple. But yeah, music, it really varies because there's so many stakeholders. Whereas I think like, I think in other outlets, whether it's documentary or film or commercials, there's like, we're heading, commercials, we're selling something, so like we have to kind of be in there. Documentaries, you're like invested in a story about something, so yeah, it kind of varies in different ways for sure.
And maybe one more thing with this, because you mentioned that this was pretty much all friends coming together. Is it, I think this fine line between being a professional creative or professionals working together in a space versus friends working together in a space, when those things get blurred, things sometimes get a bit tricky. But you seem to find that actually quite productive. So could you talk a bit more about that? Yeah,
I mean, your friends, they work in, we're all still professional, I just think in this instance it's like, it doesn't always work for sure. Like it's in many instances it's just really difficult. It's just being, again, there's no real way. I don't know if there's no real science. It's just kind of like understanding people and knowing how to get the best out of someone, when to push someone, when not to push someone, when to realize, okay, something a little deeper is happening than what's on the surface. Like maybe at that point you kind of like speak to other people in the crew and you're like, this is a situation. I think a lot of that, I don't know if the kind of stuff can be taught. For me, I guess it's intuitive and a bit instinctive. And again, it's in prep, like working with you guys. I came to your studio like 2-3 times and we like spoke. And I think at that point you start to understand people's temperament a little bit. I know what I'm like in a sort of nervous or panic situation. I know I'm pretty calm. So if other people are panicking around me, I know, or at least I hope I can calm them down. So, but I think with friends, like for me, it's interest. It's like I love making film and I love my friends. And I think making film with your friends, combining the two is just like a dream, I do something I love, For me, like filmmaking, I would do it for free, I'm obsessed with it. Like you can ask people, I go to the cinema like 2-3 times a week. I like watch films like in the, whatever, matinees. I'm just obsessed with it. Like it's something that that I've fully like chosen to allow absorb my life. So I think when I find people who share that same level of passion about what they do, and we can just talk about that stuff for ages, then not only do I admire them in many instances, but I also want to like figure out how we can work together. And that's not to say like it always works, but sometimes, again, it's like what I said before, if you create that space, then yeah, sometimes it could work out. And sometimes if it doesn't work out, the product might still be kind of interesting and weird and tense, I guess. But yeah.
So just to wrap up a few more things, because at the beginning you said that you wiped your Instagram as an act of resistance towards like excess of content, or what was it?
No, I don't know. I think at the moment I'm going through something internally whereby I don't want to be reliant on things I've made before, because I think that's a false currency. I want to like continue in this idea of like taking risks and not just like fall back on like, oh, like, I don't know. It's like that question when people ask me like, what's your style? It's like, I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. But if I had to lean on a lot of the things I have, then it might be a lot more apparent what my style is. Maybe it's like portraiture, but then again, it's like I only leaned into portraiture because I couldn't afford to do different things, you know? So I don't necessarily, I think I'm like still too early in my trajectory to like be obsessed with the things I've done before. I want to just keep using that same intuition with process and collaborating to keep making things that I'm interested in, and up until I feel like I've shifted something for myself, then I'll maybe start posting again. But for now, it's like, again, also I spend too much time there. It's like a bit of a dead space. I don't want to be like looking at what other people are making all the time. Like as a tool for communication, it's great, but there's that meme like fuck around and find out. Like that's me in a nutshell. So I don't want to be on Instagram like fucking around and finding out. I want to like be out in the real world, like meeting people, like experiencing new things, and equally like creating an obsession with those new things and trying to see if I can work with them or not. But again, I think it's something to do with value. I feel like a lot of the things I make, I'm extremely like emotionally like obsessed with them. So for me to create them and just put them out in the world, and like that's the value is negated by like a like or a comment to me. And again, that's not to devalue those spaces, because I'm like, I live on YouTube or whatever. But at this point in time, I want to figure out ways that my work can do stuff like this, like put people in a room together so people can come together and talk together and like express ideas and ask questions and maybe like form new like collaborations and alliances. Like that's what I'm interested in my sort of work doing at the moment. Whether or not it does that is like TBC, but at the moment I don't. Yeah, I've sort of removed the sort of watering hole of, I guess, Instagram. But again, people can. I'm still accessible. I'm still on there. So yeah, it's just.
And in other ways, what else do you think has changed? I mean, since you made this, what else do you think has changed in the kind of creative industry, and also has had an effect on how you see yourself in it? What has changed?
I'm sure a lot has changed. I think for right or wrong, there's like, and I say everything with a pinch of salt. I think for right or wrong, there's like a lot more representation. I think how that representation is negated to me is still a contentious issue. But I think, I think diversity is important, but how that diversity is like, again, put forward is actually what's more important, in my opinion. But to cotton on with that, I mean, I think what's changed, I don't know, I guess like a lot of the people I work with, we were all sort of on the come up, and now, again, I reference Maximilian Davis. I shot his first fashion film. He was in some of my early videos. People I worked with are now like more established. I guess that's probably what's changed. Like a lot of the people that I wanted to make videos for and put them in my videos are maybe more reflected in like the industry and different sectors of the industry, I guess. So in a way, I guess that's definitely a positive, for sure.
So our last guest, when he was asked at the end of the talk, so could you say what you think about the creative industry at large today? And he said, it's a game between givers and takers. How would you answer that question?
Ooh, I don't want to put my cynical hat on, but I would say, like, you know, I think there's like a lot to be desired, and I think many good people with very good intentions are trying to create spaces for, you know, for entry or whatever, you know. But yeah, I don't know. I think like industries, I don't know, like the industries we're in have been created for a long period of time, and there's a lot of stakeholders, and those people hold a lot of power. And up until the hierarchy, up until like people in the hierarchical positions question those positions a little bit more, then I don't necessarily, I haven't necessarily seen a lot of change, because I think you can make a lot of change on the ground level for sure, but actually it makes details really important. Context is really important. Like, you know, the sort of tactileness and specificity of that is really important. But I mean, I don't know. I think London's pretty like healthy and unhealthy in a way, because coming back to what I said before, because of limitations, I think London tends to have, and maybe I'm London-centric or whatever, a lot of creative people in a very small area, and I think by definition that sharpens your craft. So yeah, I hope that sounded a lot more positive.
Okay, we can leave it there.
Cool.
Thank you.
And thanks to the AA, and thank you guys all for coming as well, and thank you as well. Oh, yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, okay. We did say, if anyone wanted a question, feel free. Oh, here we go. We could do a couple of questions, and then I'll let everyone go, because I need to pee.
As an early career filmmaker, sometimes they struggle with finding their voice, which you talked about, finding your voice. So how did you manage to find a point of difference in your kind of filmmaking? Have you found it yet in the body of work that you've created for the moment? What is your point of differentiation, and how do you think somebody finds that point of differentiation as a filmmaker?
I would say I don't think there's any science to it. I think like follow the things that interest you, no matter how like niche they may be. Because I mean, like those are the things that you feel passionate about, and ultimately I feel like if you can incorporate those things into your craft, into your process, then that's what differentiates you. I think if you set about just trying to like mimic what other people are doing, which is the mistake I made like very early on, then you're just basically doing like a poor man's version of someone else's work. But I think if you have, I think if you pursue your interests, and I think if you, again, this one's probably a little bit more idyllic, but I think if you know why you want to be a filmmaker, that also really helps. You know, I think if you, at that point, you set an intention of like why you want to do this, what sort of stories you want to tell, why you think they're important. I think that could help. Anyone else? No? Don't be shy. Oh, yeah. Okay.
I'm pretty loud, so can you hear me? Okay, fine, I'll use a mic. You seem to be a casting director of life, really. The way you kind of ensemble your team, I think is quite beautiful. Now that you're off of social media, because it seems, well, not off, but you know what I mean, how are you navigating finding your people? Because a lot of it, you said you kind of went through Instagram, TikTok, and so how are you doing it now without that social media aspect? How are you finding your team or people you kind of like?
Still the same way. I mean, I'm off by terms of like not having images on there, but I'm still following people. I'm still messaging people. I'm going new places, meeting people, getting new interests. Like I think I'd never been to Sadler's Wells up until like late last year. I've been like twice, and just like creating different obsessions, different things where like. Yeah, different like craft-based things where people are just like really obsessed and like, I think it's like that idea of like falling into something for the first time. That kind of still allows me to keep being a caster of life, like as you say, casting director of life. But yeah, cool. Thank you. Wicked. Nice one. I think I'll mill around a little bit if anyone's too shy. But yeah, thanks again for coming. But yeah.